The crystal chandeliers of the Waldorf Astoria's grand ballroom mocked me, their light dancing on the surface of my untouched water glass. Outside, the city pulsed, indifferent to the quiet war being waged at Table 17, a war I was losing. I could feel their eyes on me, dissecting my every movement, my every breath, as if I were some inferior species allowed temporary access to their gilded cage. They thought they'd won, relegating me to this forgotten corner, a stone's throw from the swinging kitchen doors and a million miles from their shimmering world. They were wrong. The game had just begun. While my siblings were jet-setting around the world and climbing the corporate ladder, I was staying close to home, helping our mother through her illness, managing the family finances, and generally holding things together. I never asked for recognition, never expected gratitude. But this blatant display of disdain, this deliberate attempt to humiliate me in front of everyone, was a bridge too far. I felt a surge of anger, hot and sharp, but I swallowed it down, forcing myself to remain calm, to maintain the facade of indifference. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I would not let them win. The night wore on, a blur of forced smiles, awkward conversations, and passive-aggressive jabs. I excused myself frequently, seeking refuge in the dimly lit hallway, where I could catch my breath and gather my thoughts. Each trip back to the table felt like a descent into a viper's nest, each interaction a carefully choreographed dance of veiled insults and thinly disguised contempt. I watched my siblings, their faces flushed with champagne and self-importance, and I wondered how we could possibly be related, how we could have shared the same childhood, the same parents, the same experiences, and yet turned out so differently. They seemed to exist in a separate reality, a world where money was the measure of all things, and where compassion and empathy were mere weaknesses to be exploited. I remembered all the times I had bailed them out, the times I had lent them money, the times I had offered them emotional support, only to be met with indifference, or worse, ingratitude. I had always believed in the power of family, in the unbreakable bond that connected us, regardless of our differences. But now, as I sat alone in that grand ballroom, surrounded by the trappings of their success, I began to question everything I had ever believed. Maybe family wasn't about unconditional love and unwavering support. Maybe it was just another battlefield, another arena where the strong preyed on the weak. The person I trusted most was one of them. It was about respect, about recognition, about the fundamental human need to be seen and valued for who you are, not for what you have. I started to pull away, to distance myself from their world, to create a space where I could breathe, where I could be myself without fear of judgment or ridicule. I stopped attending their lavish parties, declined their invitations to exclusive events, and limited my contact with them to obligatory family gatherings. But even in my absence, their presence loomed large, casting a shadow over my life, reminding me of my perceived inadequacy, my failure to measure up to their impossible standards. My work suffered. I found it difficult to focus, my mind constantly drifting back to that night, to the faces of my siblings, their eyes filled with contempt. The empathy and compassion that had always been my strengths as a social worker now felt like weaknesses, vulnerabilities that could be exploited. I started to question my own choices, my own values, wondering if I had made a mistake, if I should have pursued a different path, a path that would have led me to wealth and status, a path that would have earned me their respect. But then I would look at the faces of the people I helped, the families I supported, the lives I touched, and I would remember why I had chosen this path, why I had dedicated my life to serving others. And I would know, deep down, that I had made the right choice, that my worth was not measured in dollars and cents, but in the impact I had on the world. Still, the doubt lingered, a persistent whisper in the back of my mind, eroding my confidence, chipping away at my resolve. I tried to talk to friends, to confide in them about my struggles, but they couldn't understand. They saw my siblings' wealth and success as something to be admired, not something to be resented. They couldn't grasp the depth of the betrayal, the pain of being rejected by your own family. I felt isolated, alone, trapped in a cycle of negativity and self-doubt. One evening, after a particularly difficult day at work, I found myself driving aimlessly, the city lights blurring through the rain-streaked windshield. I ended up at the beach, the waves crashing against the shore, the wind howling in my ears. I sat there for hours, watching the darkness, listening to the sound of the ocean, trying to find some solace, some peace. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky with hues of pink and orange, I made a decision. I would not let them break me. I would not let them define me. I would not let them win. I would fight back. Not with their weapons, not with money or status, but with my own strengths, with my intelligence, my compassion, and my unwavering determination. The game had just begun, and I was ready to play. I started documenting everything, every snide remark, every condescending comment, every subtle act of sabotage. I recorded conversations, saved emails, and collected evidence of their manipulation and deceit. I knew that I needed to be careful, that they would stop at nothing to protect their reputation and their wealth. But I was no longer afraid. I had nothing to lose. The thought of exposing their true nature, of revealing their hypocrisy to the world, filled me with a sense of purpose, a sense of power that I had not felt in a long time. It would be a long and arduous battle, but I was prepared to fight it, every step of the way. The following months bled together, a canvas of muted grays and simmering resentment. I threw myself into my work, seeking solace in the tangible difference I made in the lives of others, but even that felt tainted, a hollow victory in the face of my own personal defeat. Every success, every small victory, was overshadowed by the knowledge that my own family saw me as nothing more than a charity case, a project to be tolerated, not a person to be loved and respected. My health began to suffer. Sleepless nights gave way to exhaustion, which in turn fueled anxiety and a gnawing sense of unease. I lost weight, my clothes hanging loosely on my frame, my eyes ringed with dark circles. I became withdrawn, isolating myself from friends and colleagues, afraid to burden them with my problems, ashamed of my own vulnerability. They had broken me, piece by piece, until I barely recognized myself. One rainy Tuesday, I received a call from my father's assistant. He had been hospitalized. "Stress," she said, her voice clipped and impersonal. "The doctors are running tests." I rushed to the hospital, my heart pounding in my chest, a knot of fear tightening in my stomach. When I arrived, I found my siblings gathered in the waiting room, their faces etched with concern, but their eyes betraying a hint of something else, resentment perhaps, or maybe even a flicker of guilt. They barely acknowledged my presence, their attention focused on the stream of updates from the doctors and the endless flow of calls from business associates and social acquaintances. I sat alone in a corner, feeling like an intruder, an unwelcome guest at a private gathering. Hours passed, each one stretching into an eternity, punctuated by the sterile beeping of machines and the hushed whispers of the medical staff. Finally, a doctor emerged, his face grim. "Your father is asking for Rachel," he said, his voice barely audible above the din of the waiting room. My siblings exchanged glances, their expressions a mixture of surprise and annoyance. "Are you sure?" Jennifer asked, her voice dripping with skepticism. The doctor nodded curtly and gestured for me to follow him. I walked down the sterile corridor, my footsteps echoing in the silence, my heart pounding in my chest. When I entered the room, I found my father lying in bed, his face pale and gaunt, his eyes closed. He looked so frail, so vulnerable, so unlike the powerful, imposing figure I had always known. As I approached the bed, his eyes fluttered open, and he reached out his hand to me.
"Rachel," he whispered, his voice weak and raspy. "I need to talk to you." I sat down beside him, taking his hand in mine, my eyes filling with tears. "What is it, Dad?" I asked, my voice choked with emotion. He hesitated for a moment, his gaze searching my face, as if trying to gauge my reaction. "I know I haven't been a good father to you," he said, his voice barely audible. "I've let them treat you badly. I've let them walk all over you. And I'm sorry." The words hung in the air, heavy with regret, heavy with the weight of years of neglect and indifference. I squeezed his hand, trying to reassure him, but the truth was, his apology came too late. The damage had been done. The trust had been broken. The bond that had once connected us had been irrevocably severed. He closed his eyes, his breathing becoming shallow and labored. "They're going to try to cut you out," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "They're going to try to take everything. Don't let them." And with those words, he slipped away, leaving me alone in the room, surrounded by the ghosts of our past, facing a future filled with uncertainty and dread. My vision blurred. The glass in my hand shattered. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just felt a cold, empty void where my heart used to be. They had taken everything from me. My family, my self-respect, my hope. But they had made one fatal mistake. They had underestimated me. They thought I was weak. They thought I was broken. But they were wrong. I was not broken. I was just waiting for the right moment to strike back. From that moment on, I was no longer a victim. I was a planner. I would use their arrogance, their greed, their insatiable hunger for power against them. I would expose their lies, their deceptions, their hidden agendas. I would bring their carefully constructed world crashing down around them, and I would enjoy every minute of it. I smiled. I acted broken, but I was recording everything. I smiled, a brittle, fractured thing, as my siblings descended like vultures, their grief a performance for the cameras they undoubtedly imagined were trained on them. The will reading was a farce, a preordained play where I was cast as the ungrateful daughter, the one who didn't deserve a seat at the table, let alone a share of the inheritance. Their lawyers, sleek and predatory, circled me, their words carefully chosen to intimidate and belittle. I played the part, head bowed, eyes downcast, the picture of defeat. But beneath the surface, a plan was forming, as intricate and deadly as a spider's web. My father's warning echoed in my mind. "They're going to try to cut you out. Don't let them." He knew them better than I did, knew the depths of their depravity, their willingness to stop at nothing to get what they wanted. I began to meticulously document their every move, every lie, every manipulation. I hired a forensic accountant, a discreet and ruthless professional who specialized in unraveling complex financial schemes. Together, we started to dissect the family's empire, tracing the flow of money, uncovering hidden assets, and exposing the web of offshore accounts and shell corporations they had used to shield their wealth from taxes and scrutiny. It was a slow, painstaking process, but with each new discovery, my resolve grew stronger, my determination more unwavering. I invested in surveillance equipment, hidden cameras and microphones strategically placed to capture their private conversations, their unguarded moments of truth. I knew that they were watching me, that they were expecting me to crumble, to fade away into obscurity. But I refused to give them the satisfaction. I continued to smile, to play the dutiful daughter, attending family gatherings, participating in social events, all the while gathering evidence, building my case, preparing for the final strike. There were close calls, moments when I thought I had been discovered, when their suspicions seemed to close in around me like a noose. One evening, Jennifer cornered me at a charity gala, her eyes narrowed, her voice dripping with venom. "What are you up to, Rachel?" she hissed. "Don't think we don't see you. Don't think we don't know what you're planning." I met her gaze, my face an impassive mask. "I'm just trying to honor my father's memory," I said, my voice calm and steady. "Is that so wrong?" She searched my face, her eyes probing, trying to find a crack in my facade. But I refused to flinch, refused to betray my true intentions. She finally backed down, her expression a mixture of frustration and suspicion. "Just be careful, Rachel," she said, her voice a low growl. "You don't want to make us angry." I smiled sweetly. "I wouldn't dream of it," I replied. Inside, my heart was pounding, but I refused to let her see my fear. I knew that I was playing a dangerous game, that the stakes were high, but I was willing to risk everything to expose their true nature, to bring them to justice. The anticipation was almost unbearable, the waiting a constant torment. But I knew that I had to be patient, that I had to bide my time, to wait for the perfect moment to strike. I consulted with a team of lawyers, experts in corporate law and media relations, crafting a strategy that would not only expose their crimes, but also protect me from their inevitable backlash. We meticulously planned every detail, anticipating their every move, preparing for every possible contingency. The key, they told me, was to control the narrative, to get ahead of the story, and to present the evidence in a way that would be impossible to ignore. I worked tirelessly, day and night, fueled by anger and a burning desire for revenge. I became a master of disguise, adept at blending into their world, at mimicking their behavior, at anticipating their thoughts. I learned to speak their language, to understand their motivations, to exploit their weaknesses. Their biggest weakness? They thought they were untouchable. They believed that their wealth and power would protect them from any consequences, that they could buy their way out of any trouble. But they were wrong. I had something that they didn't have, the truth, and I was determined to use it to destroy them. The closer I got to the day of reckoning, the more intense the pressure became. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, afraid of being followed, of being discovered. I changed my routines, varied my routes, and took extra precautions to protect myself and my sources. I knew that they were capable of anything, that they would not hesitate to use their resources to silence me, to discredit me, or even to make me disappear. But I refused to be intimidated. I refused to back down. I had come too far, sacrificed too much, to turn back now. The day they tried to end me, I exposed the truth. The truth, I soon discovered, lay buried in the dry legalese of a decades-old trust, a document so convoluted that even seasoned lawyers struggled to decipher it. But my forensic accountant, a bulldog named Miss Davies, had an uncanny ability to sniff out hidden clauses and loopholes. After weeks of poring over the trust agreement, she found it, a small, almost invisible provision that stipulated that a significant portion of the family's assets would be forfeited if any member was found guilty of engaging in unethical or unlawful business practices that resulted in provable financial harm to others. It was a kill switch, a hidden bomb planted years ago by my grandfather, a man who, despite his own questionable dealings, apparently possessed a sliver of conscience. The unethical or unlawful business practices were abundant. My siblings had been systematically defrauding investors, using offshore accounts to launder money, and engaging in insider trading on a massive scale. The evidence was overwhelming, irrefutable. All I needed was the right platform to present it to the world. I decided to use their vanity against them, their insatiable need for public approval. They were planning a lavish charity gala, a black tie affair attended by the city's elite, a carefully orchestrated display of wealth and philanthropy designed to bolster their image and solidify their social standing. It was the perfect stage for their downfall. I booked a table at the gala, strategically located near the main stage, and hired a team of media professionals to document the event. I also engaged a cybersecurity expert to ensure that the evidence I planned to present could not be censored or suppressed. The final piece of the puzzle was a whistleblower, a former employee of my siblings' company who had direct knowledge of their illegal activities and was willing to testify against them.
Convincing him to come forward had been a delicate and dangerous process, but I had finally managed to gain his trust, offering him protection and financial security in exchange for his cooperation. The night of the gala arrived, a swirling vortex of glittering gowns, clinking champagne glasses, and insincere smiles. My siblings, resplendent in their designer finery, greeted guests with practiced charm, basking in the adoration of the crowd. I watched them from my table, my heart pounding in my chest, my hand trembling as I clutched the remote control that would trigger the release of the evidence. As the evening progressed, my siblings took to the stage, delivering speeches filled with platitudes about corporate responsibility and social justice. The hypocrisy was nauseating. I waited for my moment, my eyes fixed on the teleprompter, my finger poised above the button. When Jennifer began to announce a new initiative to combat financial inequality, I knew it was time. I pressed the button. Suddenly, the screens behind them flickered, replaced by a montage of damning evidence, emails, financial records, surveillance footage, all meticulously compiled and presented in a way that was impossible to misinterpret. A collective gasp swept through the room as the guests realized what was happening. My siblings froze, their faces contorted with shock and horror. Jennifer tried to regain control, to shut down the presentation, but it was too late. The cybersecurity expert had anticipated her every move, disabling the event systems and ensuring that the evidence would continue to play, uninterrupted. The whistleblower, hidden among the crowd, stepped forward, his voice amplified by the event's sound system, and began to recount the details of my siblings' crimes, his testimony clear and unwavering. Panic erupted. Guests began to flee, their expressions a mixture of disgust and disbelief. The cameras flashed, capturing every moment of the chaos, every detail of my siblings' humiliation. I sat at my table, watching the scene unfold, a sense of grim satisfaction washing over me. They had tried to destroy me, to erase me from their lives, but they had failed. I had turned their own weapon against them, using their greed and their arrogance to orchestrate their downfall. As security guards rushed towards me, I stood up, my head held high, a smile playing on my lips. It was over, or so I thought. Then I saw him. My brother, David, was nowhere to be seen at the gala itself. He was in the projection room, the one place we hadn't accounted for, the one blind spot in our plan. And in his hand, he held a device that could wipe the servers clean, erasing every single piece of evidence that had just been broadcast. The satisfaction drained from my face, replaced by a gold dread. He looked directly at me on one of the security monitors, a sinister smile spreading across his face. He raised his hand and pressed the button. The breath caught in my throat. He had the detonator. All of it. The months of careful planning, the sleepless nights, the risks I'd taken, threatened to vanish in a flash of erased data. But even as despair clawed at me, a strange calm settled. I had anticipated their ruthlessness. I just hadn't placed David in the projection room. I took a slow, deliberate breath, focusing on the security feed where his gloating face filled the screen. He thought he'd won. He was wrong. I wasn't just targeting their criminal acts. I was prepared to reveal everything. My cybersecurity expert had built in a failsafe, a delayed broadcast. The data being shown on those screens wasn't coming from the gala's servers.
It was being streamed from an off-site location, protected by layers of encryption and firewalls. David pressing that button wouldn't erase the evidence. It would only confirm his guilt, his desperation to bury the truth. As he smirked, confident in his victory, I gave a subtle nod to my team. Immediately, the audio in the room shifted. The whistleblower's testimony, which had been playing live through the Gallus sound system, was now being broadcast directly to the authorities who had been waiting close by. At the same time, a secondary feed went live, a raw, unedited stream of everything that had been recorded over the past year. Board meetings, private conversations, hushed phone calls. The stream painted a vivid picture of their corruption, their cruelty, and their complete disregard for the law. Within minutes, the room was swarming with law enforcement officers. David, still clutching the useless device, was the first to be apprehended, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. Jennifer, her carefully constructed facade crumbling, began screaming obscenities, attempting to bribe the officers, but her words fell on deaf ears. The other guests, who had moments before been fawning over my siblings, now recoiled from them as if they were diseased. The scene was one of utter pandemonium. The downfall was absolute. As my siblings were led away in handcuffs, their faces contorted with fury and despair, I allowed myself a small, tight smile. The news spread like wildfire. Every major media outlet covered the story, dissecting the evidence, analyzing the implications, and marveling at the audacity of the scheme. The family's empire, built on lies and deceit, began to crumble. Their assets were seized, their reputations tarnished, their social standing destroyed. The board members and major investors swiftly jumped ship, and the company was bankrupt within weeks. They lost everything. As for me, I testified before a grand jury, providing additional details and context to the evidence that had been uncovered. I faced intense scrutiny, but I remained steadfast, refusing to be intimidated or silenced. I knew that I had done the right thing, that I had exposed the truth, and brought justice to those who had been wronged.
In the aftermath, I retreated from the public eye, seeking solace in the quiet anonymity of my own life. I had achieved my goal, but the victory felt hollow. I had spent so long consumed by revenge that I had forgotten what it felt like to simply be happy. I saw them in court when they were prosecuted and given lengthy prison sentences. I felt nothing but indifference, finally free of the anger that had consumed me for so long. I picked up the pieces of my shattered life, determined to rebuild something meaningful, something lasting. I started a foundation dedicated to helping victims of corporate fraud and corruption, using my experience to empower others and prevent similar tragedies from happening in the future. It wasn't about erasing the past, but about creating a future where justice prevailed. The scars of betrayal would always remain, but they would serve as a reminder of my strength, my resilience, and my unwavering commitment to the truth. They lost everything. I just smiled. Revenge isn't sweet. It's necessary. Would you have done the same? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more justice.